Have you ever wondered if the stories your grandmother whispered to you about great floods and lost worlds weren't just bedtime tales, but echoes of something far more profound? What if I told you that scattered across every continent, buried beneath our feet and hidden beneath the waves, lies evidence of a catastrophe so immense it rewrote the very fabric of human history? Tonight, we're diving into waters deeper than any ocean, exploring a mystery that has haunted humanity for millennia: the Great Flood. You know the story: Noah's Ark, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and a world cleansed of its wickedness. But step back from the biblical narrative for a moment and consider this. The Mesopotamians told of Utnapishtim, warned by the gods of a coming deluge, building a massive vessel to save his family and the seeds of all living things. The Hindus spoke of Manu, guided by a divine fish through rising waters to repopulate a drowned earth. The Maya described survivors chosen to rebuild after catastrophic flooding destroyed their ancestors' world. Now here's where it gets interesting. What if the Great Flood was real and erased an advanced civilization before us? If such a civilization existed, if they were wiped out by catastrophic flooding, then we're not the first to reach for the stars. We're not the pioneers of progress we imagine ourselves to be. We might be the inheritors, rebuilding from fragments, piecing together a puzzle whose original picture was lost beneath the waves. And if we're inheriting fragments of a lost world, then the myths and legends, the stories of gods and sky beings who taught humanity the arts of civilization, take on new meaning. What we're uncovering isn't just challenging academic assumptions. It's revealing a pattern of rise and fall, creation and destruction that suggests history isn't the straight line of progress we've been taught. The evidence is there, and the answers lie waiting in the depths, both of our oceans and our past. So settle back, relax, and let's uncover them together. Deep beneath the waves off India's northwestern coast, sonar pulses pierce through 120 feet of murky water, revealing something that shouldn't exist. Geometric patterns emerge on the screens, straight lines forming perfect grids, rectangular foundations arranged with the precision of a master architect. This is the Gulf of Cambay, and what lies buried in its sediment-choked depths challenges everything we've been taught about when human civilization truly began. The year was 2001, when marine archaeologists first mapped these structures. 9 square miles of what appears to be a planned settlement, complete with drainage channels and organised street layouts. Carbon dating of recovered artefacts pushes the timeline back to around 9,000 years ago, making this site older than the Indus Valley civilization by several millennia. But here's what makes the discovery truly extraordinary. The thick layers of marine silt blanketing these ruins tell a story not of gradual submersion, but of sudden catastrophic flooding. Imagine a thriving coastal city, its inhabitants going about their daily lives, completely unaware that in a matter of days, perhaps hours, their entire world would be swallowed by waters rising faster than they could flee. The sediment analysis reveals a sharp transition from terrestrial to marine deposits, the geological equivalent of a death certificate signed in mud and time. But the Gulf of Cambay isn't alone in its underwater testimony. Halfway around the world, off the coast of Japan's Ryukyu Islands, another enigma rises from the ocean floor. The Yonaguni monument, discovered by a sport diver in 1986, presents a puzzle that has divided the scientific community for decades. Massive stone platforms, terraces, and what appear to be staircases descend into the blue-black depths, their surfaces carved with right angles, so precise they seem to mock the chaos of natural erosion. Dr. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist who has spent over 2 decades studying Yonaguni, points to evidence that challenges the comfortable assumption of natural formation. Tool marks scarred into the stone, drainage channels that follow logical patterns, and most intriguingly, what appears to be a carved human face gazing up from the depths. The structure's alignment with the constellation Orion mirrors similar astronomical connections found at sites like Göbekli Tepe, suggesting a shared knowledge base that spanned continents. The timeline for Yonaguni's submersion aligns perfectly with the Younger Dryas period, that chaotic epoch between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, when our planet convulsed through rapid climate shifts. Ice core data from Greenland tells the story in frozen layers, temperatures plummeting and soaring within decades, massive ice sheets melting with terrifying speed, and sea levels rising by tens of feet in what amounts to geological minutes. This wasn't the gradual change we associate with natural climate cycles. This was catastrophic, the kind of rapid transformation that leaves civilizations with no time to adapt, no opportunity to relocate their coastal cities to higher ground. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis provides a mechanism for such chaos, comet fragments slamming into Earth's ice sheets, triggering not just melting, but massive atmospheric disruption that sent shockwaves through the global climate system. The evidence for these impacts has been accumulating like water behind a dam. Sediment layers from around the world contain the signature of cosmic catastrophe. Nanodiamonds that form only under extreme pressure, iridium concentrations typically associated with space objects, and microscopic spherules created when rock and ice are vaporized by tremendous impact forces. These aren't isolated anomalies, they form a consistent pattern across continents, a global fingerprint of destruction dated precisely to the beginning of the Younger Dryas. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the landscape itself, carved in stone by waters that moved with the fury of planetary-scale destruction. Return with me to those channeled scablands we glimpsed earlier, but this time, truly grasp the magnitude of what you're seeing. These aren't gentle river valleys carved over millions of years. These are scars gouged into solid basalt by floods so massive they dwarf every disaster in recorded history. Picture walls of water 400 feet high, moving at speeds that would make modern freight trains seem sluggish. The energy released by these floods exceeded the power of all the world's rivers combined, multiplied by 10. Boulders the size of houses were picked up and hurled across the landscape like pebbles. Solid rock was carved into ripples the height of 10-story buildings, frozen waves in stone that speak of forces beyond human comprehension. The geological evidence is unambiguous. These floods happened multiple times as glacial dams repeatedly formed and burst, each event reshaping the landscape in a matter of days. If such forces were unleashed on a global scale during the Younger Dryas, as the impact evidence suggests, then no coastal civilization, however advanced, could have survived intact. Yet survival stories persist in the flood myths, and they all share a crucial detail often overlooked by those who dismiss these tales as mere folklore. The survivors weren't chosen randomly, they were specifically selected to preserve knowledge, skills, and the seeds of future civilization. Utnapishtim saved craftsmen alongside animals. Manu preserved not just life, but the principles needed to rebuild society. These weren't just rescue missions, they were carefully planned preservation efforts. This pattern of knowledge preservation becomes even more significant when we examine what actually survived the catastrophe. The Sumerian tablets that appear seemingly from nowhere in Mesopotamia contain mathematical concepts that shouldn't have existed for centuries. Trigonometric calculations, astronomical observations of planets invisible to the naked eye, and engineering principles that allowed them to build structures of remarkable sophistication. Consider the Plimpton 322 tablet, a piece of fired clay that contains what may be the world's oldest and most accurate trigonometric table. This isn't primitive mathematics slowly developing through trial and error. This is sophisticated, systematic knowledge that implies generations of accumulated learning. Where did such knowledge originate in a supposedly primitive civilization just emerging from the Stone Age? The answer may lie in the flood myths themselves. They consistently describe not just physical survival, but the deliberate preservation of wisdom. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, creating their massive stone circles in the immediate aftermath of the Younger Dryas, weren't starting from scratch. They were working from inherited knowledge, following plans and techniques passed down by teachers who remembered a world before the waters. This inheritance model explains anomalies that have puzzled archaeologists for decades. Why do the oldest layers of many ancient sites show the most advanced construction techniques? Why does sophisticated astronomical knowledge appear fully formed in early civilizations? Why do flood myths from around the world all emphasize the preservation of knowledge and skills alongside biological diversity? The answer suggests something profound about the nature of human civilization itself. We may not be witnessing the birth of complex society in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. We may be witnessing its rebirth, the painstaking reconstruction of capabilities that were once commonplace, but nearly lost to catastrophic flooding. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient achievements. The precision engineering of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge, the mathematical sophistication of Mayan calendars, these might not represent the pinnacle of ancient achievement, but rather the shadows of something far greater that was washed away by the rising waters of the younger Dryas. The implications extend beyond mere historical curiosity. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen before, if the cyclical view of history preserved in ancient texts reflects actual experience rather than mythological speculation, then our own technological civilization exists within a larger pattern of rise and fall that we ignore at our peril. The ocean floors hold the answers to these questions, locked away in sediment and silence. Modern deep-sea exploration technology is finally beginning to lift the veil on what lies beneath the waves. Side-scan sonar can map underwater structures with unprecedented precision. Autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with high-resolution cameras can explore depths that would crush human divers. Radiocarbon dating can provide accurate timelines for organic materials preserved in anaerobic ocean environments. Yet funding for such exploration remains limited, and access to many promising sites is restricted by political and institutional barriers. The Cuban underwater structures discovered in 2001 showed clear geometric patterns suggesting artificial construction, but the site was quickly classified and exploration curtailed. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas, with its precisely fitted limestone blocks, continues to generate controversy precisely because its implications challenge accepted historical narratives. This resistance to exploration isn't necessarily conspiratorial in nature, but it reflects a deeper institutional bias toward maintaining established timelines and explanations. Academic careers are built on existing paradigms, and funding flows toward research that confirms rather than challenges accepted wisdom. When evidence emerges that doesn't fit the conventional story of human development, it's often easier to dismiss or ignore than to investigate thoroughly. But the evidence continues to accumulate, like water rising behind an increasingly fragile dam of conventional thinking. Each new underwater discovery, each anomalous artifact, each flood myth decoded adds weight to the possibility that we've been telling ourselves a simplified story about human history, one that ignores the catastrophic interruptions that have repeatedly reset the clock of civilization. The survivors of the Great Flood weren't just preserving biological diversity when they loaded their vessels with animals and seeds. They were preserving the accumulated wisdom of ages, the hard-won knowledge that represents humanity's greatest achievement. That some of this knowledge survived, hidden in myths and monuments, encoded in mathematics and astronomy, suggests that the next great discovery in human history might not come from pushing forward into the unknown, but from diving backward into the depths of what we've forgotten. The waters that rose during the Younger Dryas didn't just reshape coastlines and drown cities, they created a discontinuity in human memory, a break in the chain of knowledge that forces each generation to rediscover what previous civilizations may have known instinctively. We are not the first to reach for the stars, to split atoms, to decode the genetic blueprint of life itself. We may be the latest in a series of civilizations that have scaled these heights before, only to see their achievements washed away by forces beyond their control. This is the true message of the flood myths, the warning encoded in every culture's memory of rising waters and narrow escapes. The Earth is not a stable platform for civilization. It is a dynamic, sometimes violent system that can erase millennia of progress in a matter of decades. The question facing us now is not whether such catastrophes can happen again, but whether we will be prepared when they do. The next great flood may not come from above, in the form of divine judgment, or from below, in the form of glacial melting. It may come from beyond, in the form of cosmic impacts, or from within, in the form of technological hubris that outpaces wisdom. But if the patterns preserved in myth and stone hold true, it will come, and when it does, the survivors will once again face the challenge of preserving what matters most from the civilization that came before. The traces of preserved knowledge scattered across ancient civilizations paint a picture so extraordinary it challenges our most fundamental assumptions about human development. When we examine the mathematical tablets emerging from early Mesopotamia, we're not seeing the fumbling first steps of primitive minds grappling with numbers. We're witnessing the resurrection of sophisticated systems that appear fully formed, as if remembered rather than invented. The Sumerians possessed astronomical knowledge that shouldn't have existed for their supposed level of development. Their cuneiform tablets describe the orbits of planets with mathematical precision, tracking celestial bodies invisible to the naked eye that weren't officially rediscovered until we developed telescopes thousands of years later. They calculated square roots and cubic equations with systematic accuracy that suggests generations of accumulated learning, not the trial and error discoveries of a nascent civilization. But perhaps most intriguing are the tablets that seem to encode memories of catastrophe itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't just tell the story of a flood, it preserves specific details about preservation techniques, the types of knowledge that must be saved, and the methods by which civilization can be rebuilt from fragments. These aren't just stories, they're instruction manuals, survival guides written by those who lived through the unthinkable. Travel to ancient Egypt, and the pattern continues. The Dendera temple complex contains carvings that have puzzled archaeologists for decades. Carved into stone walls are images that bear an unsettling resemblance to modern electrical devices. Bulb-like shapes connected to what appear to be cables, held by figures in ceremonial poses. The conventional explanation dismisses these as symbolic representations of mythological serpents. But the technical detail in these carvings, the precision of the depicted components, suggests the artists were working from memory of actual devices rather than abstract religious concepts. The sophistication appears elsewhere in Egyptian achievements that seem to emerge from nowhere. The precision of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments of temple complexes, the mathematical relationships encoded in their architecture all point to inherited knowledge rather than gradual development. The oldest Egyptian texts already contain references to the lost civilization of Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked among humans and taught them the arts of civilization. Cross the ocean to the highlands of Bolivia, and Tiwanaku's Gate of the Sun presents another puzzle wrapped in stone. This monolithic arch, carved from a single block of andesite, bears intricate symbols that some researchers interpret as a solar calendar, more accurate than our modern Gregorian system. The precision required to create such calculations, the astronomical observations necessary to verify their accuracy, implies centuries of systematic study. Yet Tiwanaku sits in a region that shows clear evidence of catastrophic flooding, its foundations buried under layers of silt that speak of sudden inundation. The pattern extends to technologies that seem impossibly advanced for their credited time periods. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck and dated to around 100 BCE, represents a level of mechanical sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the development of clockwork in medieval Europe. This bronze device, filled with precisely calibrated gears, could predict planetary movements, eclipses, and even Olympic dates with mechanical precision that rivals modern instruments. What makes the Antikythera mechanism particularly significant is that it wasn't a unique creation. Ancient texts reference similar devices, and the mathematical principles underlying its construction trace back to Babylonian astronomical traditions that themselves appear to emerge fully formed from earlier sources. This suggests not an isolated genius creating a one-off invention, but the preservation of technological knowledge from a broader tradition that has been largely lost. The evidence extends beyond individual artifacts to entire knowledge systems that appear simultaneously across cultures with no apparent contact. The precision of Mayan astronomical calculations rivals modern observations. Yet the Maya claimed their knowledge came from ancestors who survived a great flood. Hindu texts describe flying machines powered by mysterious energies, technologies so advanced they sound like science fiction. Yet these descriptions are embedded in religious traditions that predate known historical civilizations. The Vedic texts of ancient India contain mathematical concepts that weren't rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. They describe atomic theory, genetic principles, and cosmological models that align with modern scientific understanding. The precision of their astronomical observations, recorded in texts thousands of years old, demonstrates a level of systematic study that implies institutional knowledge preserved across generations. But perhaps most telling are the consistent references across cultures to teachers who arrived after great floods to impart this wisdom. The Sumerian Anunnaki, described as those who came from heaven to earth, taught humanity agriculture, mathematics, and the observation of celestial cycles. Egyptian texts speak of the Neteru, divine beings who established civilization along the Nile after a great catastrophe. Mayan traditions honor Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge of astronomy and calendar making after the destruction of previous worlds. These figures, dismissed by mainstream archaeology as mythological, share characteristics that suggest they may have been real individuals, survivors of advanced civilizations who possessed knowledge that seemed magical to rebuilding societies. Their teachings weren't supernatural revelations, but practical applications of scientific principles developed over millennia and preserved through catastrophe by those fortunate enough to escape the rising waters. The flood myths themselves provide crucial context for understanding how such knowledge could survive global catastrophe. They consistently emphasize the preservation of crafts, skills, and wisdom alongside biological diversity. Noah saves not just animals, but representatives of every kind of knowledge needed to rebuild civilization. Utnapishtim, specifically, preserves craftsmen and their techniques. These aren't random survival stories. They're accounts of deliberate preservation efforts by those who understood what was at stake. The implications of this inherited knowledge model extend far beyond historical curiosity. If post-flood civilizations were rebuilding rather than starting fresh, it explains anomalies that have puzzled researchers for generations. Why do the oldest layers of many ancient sites show the most sophisticated construction techniques? Why does advanced astronomical knowledge appear without apparent developmental stages? Why do flood myths from isolated cultures all emphasize the same themes of knowledge preservation and transfer? The answer suggests that human technological development isn't the linear progression we've assumed. Instead, it may be a cyclical process of rise, catastrophic interruption, and painstaking reconstruction from fragments. Each cycle begins not from primitive conditions, but from whatever knowledge base the survivors managed to preserve through the chaos. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient achievements. The mathematical sophistication of early civilizations, their astronomical precision, their engineering capabilities may not represent the dawn of human intellectual achievement, but rather its phoenix-like resurrection, from the ashes of something far greater. We're not witnessing humanity's first steps toward understanding the cosmos. We're seeing civilizations struggling to remember what they once knew instinctively. The consistency of this pattern across cultures and continents suggests something profound about the nature of human knowledge itself. Advanced understanding doesn't develop in isolation. It requires institutional continuity, systematic observation, and accumulated learning that spans generations. When catastrophe interrupts this process, the surviving fragments become the seeds from which new civilizations grow, carrying within them the genetic memory of greater achievements. But if such knowledge once existed at levels far beyond what we credit to ancient peoples, what else might they have understood? The flood myths hint at technologies and capabilities that sound fantastical to modern ears: energy systems that harnessed natural forces, transportation methods that defied conventional physics, communication networks that spanned continents. These may not be imaginative fiction, but dim memories of actual capabilities, preserved in story form when the technical understanding was lost. The Vimanas described in Hindu texts, with their detailed specifications for construction and operation, read like technical manuals for advanced aircraft. The Mayan descriptions of crystal-powered technologies, the Egyptian references to devices that channeled celestial energies, the Sumerian accounts of machines that could control weather patterns. These may be fragmentary records of actual technologies, their scientific principles lost, but their memory preserved in mythological form. Modern science is beginning to rediscover principles that ancient texts describe in metaphorical language. Quantum mechanics, genetic engineering, consciousness research, and energy manipulation technologies are revealing possibilities that ancient wisdom traditions have long claimed as fundamental truths. The convergence suggests not that ancient peoples were remarkably prescient, but that they may have been remarkably knowledgeable, possessing scientific understanding that was nearly lost to catastrophic flooding but preserved in fragmentary form. The question this raises is profound. If we are rebuilding rather than building, if our greatest achievements represent recovery rather than discovery, what does this mean for our future development? Are we approaching the same level of advancement that was achieved before the Great Floods? And if so, are we prepared for the cyclical challenges that such advancement might bring? The ancient texts that preserve flood memories also contain warnings about the dangers of unchecked technological development. They speak of civilizations that grew so advanced they forgot their connection to natural cycles, that became so powerful they believed themselves immune to cosmic forces. The floods in many traditions come not as random disasters, but as natural corrections to imbalances created by excessive technological manipulation of natural systems. This cyclical view of civilization suggests that we may be approaching a critical juncture in our own development. The technologies we're developing, artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, climate modification, space colonization, may be reaching levels comparable to those achieved by pre-flood civilizations. The question is whether we can learn from their fate, whether the warnings preserved in flood myths can guide us towards sustainable advancement rather than cyclical destruction. The ocean floors hold additional answers to these questions, but accessing them requires acknowledging possibilities that challenge our most basic assumptions about human history. Each underwater discovery, each anomalous artifact, each flood myth decoded adds weight to the possibility that we've been living inside a much larger story than we imagined, one where our current technological civilization represents not humanity's first attempt at advancement, but its latest effort to rebuild from the fragments of something far greater. The evidence is accumulating like water behind a dam, pressing against the barriers of conventional thinking with increasing force. The question is not whether these barriers will eventually give way, but whether we'll be prepared for the flood of new understanding that their collapse will release. The truth about what lies beneath the waves, preserved in sediment and silence, may be the key to understanding not just where we came from, but where we might be heading if we continue to ignore the cyclical nature of civilization itself. The survivors of the Great Flood weren't just preserving their own lives when they loaded their vessels with knowledge and seeds. They were preserving the future possibility of human advancement, ensuring that the next civilization wouldn't have to start completely from scratch. We are the inheritors of their foresight, the beneficiaries of their desperate efforts to maintain the continuity of human understanding across the gulf of catastrophic destruction. But inheritance comes with responsibility. If we truly are rebuilding from fragments of a lost world, then our greatest discoveries may not lie ahead of us in uncharted territories of scientific advancement, but behind us in the depths of what we've forgotten. The next great breakthrough in human understanding may require not just pushing forward into the unknown, but diving backward into the depths of inherited memory, recovering the knowledge that was nearly lost beneath the rising waters of time. The ancient world holds secrets that would make your head spin, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the mysterious monuments scattered across our planet like puzzle pieces from a shattered picture. But here's what gets truly fascinating. These aren't just impressive old buildings, they're potential survivors, stone witnesses to a world that was washed away. Let's start with something that shouldn't exist according to everything we've been taught about human development. In the hills of southeastern Turkey, rising from the earth like a riddle carved in stone, stands Göbekli Tepe. This isn't just old, this is mind-bendingly ancient. We're talking 11,600 years old, which puts it a full 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Yet the precision, the sophistication, the sheer ambition of this place makes those later monuments look like practice runs. Picture massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles and adorned with intricate carvings of animals, humans, and celestial symbols. These weren't crude stone arrangements slapped together by primitive hunter-gatherers. These were precision-engineered monuments requiring advanced planning, sophisticated tools, and knowledge of astronomy that we supposedly wouldn't see for thousands of years. But here's where it gets really strange. Göbekli Tepe shows signs of deliberate burial, not natural erosion or gradual decay. Someone took the time and effort to bury these massive structures under tons of earth, as if they were trying to preserve them, or hide them. Many of the pillars bear cracks and weathering patterns consistent with exposure to violent water flow. Could these be scars from the very flood that destroyed the civilization that built them? The astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe aren't random either. These structures track celestial events with precision that suggests deep understanding of cycles that take thousands of years to complete. The kind of knowledge that requires institutional memory, systematic observation, and accumulated learning spanning generations. This wasn't the work of nomads who happened to get lucky with their stone placement. Now travel with me across the globe to the highlands of Bolivia, where another impossible structure challenges everything we think we know about ancient capabilities. At over 12,600 feet above sea level, in an environment so harsh that mere survival is a daily struggle, stands Puma Punku. If Göbekli Tepe is puzzling, Puma Punku is downright mystifying. We're looking at stone blocks weighing over 100 tons, shaped with precision that makes modern engineers scratch their heads in bewilderment. These aren't roughly hewn rocks stacked on top of each other. These are perfectly fitted pieces of andesite, one of the hardest stones to work, cut with flat surfaces, right angles, and interlocking joints so tight you couldn't slide a piece of paper between them. The precision is so exact it looks machine-made. Some blocks feature grooves and drill holes that appear to have been created by tools we associate with modern industrial processes. The surfaces are polished to a mirror-like finish, and the modular design suggests mass production techniques. How did people, without metal tools, without the wheel, without modern machinery, accomplish this level of precision? Like Göbekli Tepe, Puma Punku bears the scars of catastrophe. Many blocks are scattered as if toppled by sudden force, Sediment layers around the site tell a story of flooding, with water-deposited silt covering the lower structures. The region shows evidence of ancient lake beds, possibly formed by glacial meltwater surges during that chaotic Younger Dryas period we keep encountering. The pattern becomes even more intriguing when you realize that the most precise, most sophisticated work at these sites is found in the oldest layers. Later additions by subsequent cultures are cruder, simpler, as if the knowledge and techniques required for the original construction had been lost. This suggests that these monuments weren't built by civilizations gradually developing their skills. They were built by people who already possessed advanced knowledge and then lost it. But the evidence doesn't stop at these famous sites. Scattered across the globe are structures that share similar characteristics: impossible precision, astronomical alignments, and signs of sudden abandonment or catastrophic damage. In Lebanon, the Baalbek complex features trilithon stones weighing over 800 tons, precisely fitted beneath later Roman additions. The Romans were master engineers, but even they couldn't have moved stones of this size with their known techniques. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman feature massive stones fitted together with joints so precise they've survived centuries of earthquakes that have toppled newer constructions. The Incas claimed they didn't build these walls, but found them already in place, left by a previous civilization they called the Viracocha people, who supposedly possessed godlike powers. Easter Island's Moai statues present another puzzle wrapped in Pacific isolation. These massive stone figures, some weighing 80 tons, were carved and positioned using techniques that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of acoustics, engineering, and astronomy. When researchers asked the Rapa Nui people about the origin of their ancestors' knowledge, they consistently pointed to inherited wisdom from survivors of a great flood who brought the secrets of stonework from a lost homeland. The precision required for these constructions suggests not just advanced knowledge, but standardized techniques. The modular designs, the consistent measurements, the repeated use of specific angles and proportions all point to a shared knowledge base, possibly distributed from a common source. Could this source have been a maritime civilization that spread its knowledge across the globe before being destroyed by rising waters? The timing of these structures is particularly significant. Many date to the period immediately following the Younger Dryas, as if they were built by survivors of that catastrophic epoch. The knowledge they demonstrate doesn't show the gradual development we'd expect from primitive societies learning through trial and error. Instead, it appears fully formed, as if remembered rather than discovered. Consider the implications. If these monuments were built by survivors of a flood-destroyed civilization, they represent more than impressive ancient architecture. They're messages in stone, attempts by desperate people to preserve knowledge for future generations. The astronomical alignments aren't just religious symbols. They're calendars, star maps, and instruction manuals encoded in rock that could survive when written records perished. The deliberate burial of sites like Göbekli Tepe takes on new meaning in this context. Perhaps these weren't just preservation efforts, but time capsules deliberately hidden until future civilizations developed the technology and wisdom to understand their significance. The builders may have known that another catastrophic cycle was coming and wanted to ensure that some trace of their knowledge would survive. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. If these structures were built by survivors working from inherited knowledge, what did the original civilization look like? If these monuments represent fragments, shadows of greater capabilities, what level of advancement are we talking about? The precision of Puma Punku, the sophistication of Göbekli Tepe, the engineering mastery of Baalbek might be crude approximations of what was lost, attempts by desperate survivors to recreate capabilities they only partially understood. The flood myths support this interpretation. They consistently describe not just the preservation of biological diversity, but the desperate effort to save knowledge, skills, and techniques. The chosen survivors aren't just righteous individuals. They're keepers of civilization's most important secrets, tasked with ensuring that humanity's accumulated wisdom doesn't disappear entirely beneath the rising waters. Modern archaeology struggles with these sites because they don't fit the accepted timeline of human development. The conventional story has humans gradually progressing from hunter-gatherers to farmers to builders of simple structures to creators of complex civilizations. But these monuments suggest a different pattern. Advanced knowledge appearing suddenly, being partially lost, then being slowly rediscovered by later cultures. The resistance to accepting this alternative timeline isn't just academic stubbornness. It challenges fundamental assumptions about human progress, about our place in history, about whether we're climbing towards civilization's peak or struggling to recover from its destruction. Acknowledging that these monuments might be remnants of a lost world opens uncomfortable questions about the stability of our own technological civilization. Yet the evidence continues to accumulate. Each new discovery of precisely cut stone, each astronomical alignment decoded, each flood myth translated adds weight to the possibility that we've been telling ourselves a simplified story about human history. The monuments aren't just impressive ancient buildings, they're breadcrumbs leading back to a truth we've been reluctant to face. We may not be the first human civilization to achieve advanced capabilities, and we're probably not the last to face the cyclical challenges that such advancement brings. The ocean depths hold even more dramatic evidence of civilization's loss to rising waters. While the monuments on land whisper of catastrophic interruption, the structures beneath the waves scream of sudden, overwhelming destruction. These aren't gradual submersions caused by slowly rising seas. These are the remains of thriving cities caught off guard by waters that rose faster than their inhabitants could flee. The story begins to crystallize when we examine these underwater sites not as isolated anomalies, but as pieces of a global pattern. The timing, the construction techniques, the evidence of rapid inundation all point to a worldwide network of coastal civilizations that were simultaneously destroyed by the same catastrophic flooding that carved the channeled scablands and buried the monuments on higher ground. But the ocean floors hold more than just ruins. They preserve the possibility that some remnants of advanced technology, sophisticated knowledge systems, and cultural achievements survived the deluge in forms we're only beginning to recognize. The question isn't just what was lost beneath the waves, but what might still be waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to challenge the conventional story of human development. The depth of the ocean has protected these secrets for millennia, but modern technology is finally beginning to penetrate that protective barrier. What we find there may force us to completely rewrite our understanding of human civilization, to acknowledge that we're not building toward an unprecedented future, but rebuilding from fragments of an extraordinary past that was nearly erased by forces beyond human control. The depths of our oceans conceal more than sunken ships and forgotten treasures. They harbour the remnants of entire worlds, civilizations that thrived when our planet's coastlines looked radically different from today. As we peer through the murky waters with our most advanced sonar systems, we're not just mapping the seafloor, we're uncovering evidence of a catastrophe so complete, so devastating, that it erased entire chapters of human achievement from the surface world. But here's what makes these underwater discoveries truly extraordinary. They're not scattered randomly across the ocean floor, like debris from some ancient accident. They form patterns, clusters of sophisticated structures that suggest coordinated urban planning on a scale that rivals modern cities. The precision of their construction, the complexity of their layouts, and most importantly, the thick layers of sediment that buried them tell a story of rapid destruction that aligns perfectly with the flood narratives we've been exploring. When marine archaeologists first began mapping these submerged sites, they expected to find the remains of simple fishing villages or primitive coastal settlements. What they discovered instead challenged every assumption about the capabilities of ancient civilizations. We're talking about structures that demonstrate understanding of hydraulic engineering, astronomical alignment, and urban planning that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city development project. The Gulf of Cambay off India's coast presents perhaps the most compelling evidence of this lost world. Sonar imaging reveals a geometric precision that defies natural explanation. Streets laid out in perfect grids, foundations for buildings arranged with mathematical exactitude, and drainage systems that show sophisticated understanding of water management. This isn't the work of simple coastal dwellers. This is evidence of a civilization that had mastered the complexities of large-scale urban development. Carbon dating of artifacts recovered from the site pushes the timeline back to around 9,000 years ago, making these structures older than the Indus Valley civilization by several millennia. But it's not just the age that's remarkable, it's the evidence of how these cities met their end. The sediment analysis tells a story of sudden, catastrophic flooding. The transition from terrestrial to marine deposits happens so abruptly in the geological record that it suggests these communities had virtually no time to evacuate or adapt. Imagine the final days of these coastal cities, the inhabitants going about their daily routines, perhaps noticing unusual tidal patterns or strange atmospheric phenomena, but having no real understanding of the magnitude of destruction bearing down on them. When the waters came, they came with such speed and volume that entire urban centres were swallowed in a matter of hours or days, buried under layers of silt that would preserve them for thousands of years. The Yonaguni monument off Japan's coast tells a similar story, but with even more dramatic implications. This massive underwater structure, with its terraced platforms and precise right angles, has divided the scientific community precisely because its implications are so profound. If this is a natural formation, as some insist, then nature has somehow managed to create perfect staircases, flat platforms, and geometric precision that would make any architect proud. If it's artificial, then we're looking at evidence of advanced engineering capabilities existing thousands of years before conventional history suggests such knowledge was possible. Dr. Masaki Kimura's decades of research at Yonaguni have uncovered details that become increasingly difficult to explain through natural processes. Tool marks scarred into the stone surface, drainage channels that follow logical engineering principles, and what appears to be carved symbolic imagery all point to human intervention on a massive scale. The structure's alignment with celestial bodies mirrors similar astronomical connections found at land-based monuments, suggesting a shared knowledge base that spanned continents and cultures. But perhaps most significantly, the timing of Yonaguni's submersion aligns perfectly with the Younger Dryas period, that epoch of rapid climate change and massive flooding that we keep encountering in our investigation. The same forces that carved the channeled scablands and triggered global sea level rise would have been more than capable of submerging coastal structures like Yonaguni in a matter of decades. The pattern extends far beyond these two sites. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans have revealed geometric structures at depths of over 2,000 feet, their regular patterns and straight lines suggesting artificial construction on an enormous scale. The depth alone indicates that these structures would have been above water during the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today. Yet the sophistication implied by their geometric precision suggests a level of civilization that mainstream archaeology doesn't recognize for that time period. In the Mediterranean, submerged ruins off Egypt and Greece point to port cities and coastal settlements that were thriving centers of commerce and culture before rising waters claimed them. The sediment layers covering these sites show the same pattern we've seen elsewhere, sudden inundation rather than gradual submersion, suggesting that whatever caused the flooding happened too quickly for organized evacuation or adaptation. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas presents another piece of this underwater puzzle. This half-mile-long pathway of massive limestone blocks, precisely fitted together and submerged under 15 feet of water, has generated controversy precisely because its implications challenge accepted historical timelines. The block's regular shapes, their careful arrangement, and their construction from materials not native to the immediate area all suggest human engineering on a significant scale. What makes these discoveries particularly significant is not just their individual characteristics, but their collective pattern. They're all coastal. They all show evidence of rapid submersion. They all demonstrate construction techniques and urban planning capabilities that exceed what we credit to civilizations of their supposed age. And they all date to the same general period, the end of the last ice age and the beginning of the younger dryas, when massive climatic upheavals were reshaping the planet's surface. The implications of this pattern are staggering. If these sites represent the remains of a global network of coastal civilizations, then we're not just talking about isolated communities that happened to be in the wrong place when sea levels rose. We're talking about an interconnected world system, a maritime civilization that may have spanned continents and facilitated trade, cultural exchange, and technological development on a scale that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. The flood myths take on new significance in this context. They're not just stories about divine judgment or moral lessons about human behavior. They're historical records, eyewitness accounts passed down through generations of survivors who watched their world disappear beneath the waves. The consistent details across cultures about chosen survivors, preserved knowledge, and the deliberate effort to maintain civilization's achievements through the catastrophe aren't mythological embellishments. They're practical descriptions of how advanced societies attempted to survive global destruction. But here's where the story becomes even more extraordinary. The evidence suggests that some of these preservation efforts succeeded. The advanced knowledge that appears suddenly in post-flood civilizations, the sophisticated astronomical observations in Sumerian tablets, the precision engineering techniques used in monuments like Göbekli Tepe and Puma Punku all point to inherited wisdom rather than gradual discovery. The survivors of the Great Flood weren't just preserving their own lives, they were maintaining the continuity of human knowledge across a catastrophic break in civilization. The maritime networks that once connected the submerged cities were rebuilt on a smaller scale. The astronomical observations that guided navigation across vast oceans were preserved in stone monuments and mathematical tablets. The engineering techniques that created underwater marvels like Yonaguni were applied to land-based construction projects that still astound us today. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient achievements. The pyramids of Egypt, the megalithic structures of Peru, the astronomical precision of Mayan calendars aren't necessarily representing humanity's first attempts at advanced civilization. They may be representing its determined effort to rebuild from fragments, to reconstruct capabilities that were once commonplace but nearly lost to catastrophic flooding. The ocean floors hold the evidence of what was lost, but they also preserve the possibility of what might be recovered. Modern deep-sea exploration technology is finally beginning to penetrate the protective barrier of depth and sediment that has hidden these secrets for millennia. Side-scan sonar can map underwater structures with unprecedented precision. Autonomous underwater vehicles can explore depths that would crush human divers. Advanced dating techniques can provide accurate timelines for organic materials preserved in the anaerobic environment of deep ocean sediments. Yet access to many of these sites remains limited, not by technical challenges, but by institutional barriers. The Cuban underwater structures, despite their obvious geometric precision and potential historical significance, remain largely unexplored due to political restrictions and limited funding. The Bimini Road continues to generate controversy not because the evidence is unclear, but because its implications challenge established academic narratives about human development. This resistance to underwater exploration isn't necessarily conspiratorial, but it reflects a deeper institutional bias toward maintaining comfortable assumptions about the past. Academic careers are built on existing paradigms. Research funding flows toward projects that confirm rather than challenge accepted wisdom. When evidence emerges that doesn't fit the conventional story of gradual human progress from primitive to advanced, it's often easier to dismiss or ignore than to investigate thoroughly. But the evidence continues to accumulate like sediment on the ocean floor, building layers of proof that become increasingly difficult to explain away. Each new underwater discovery, each anomalous artifact recovered from the depths, each flood myth decoded and translated adds weight to the possibility that we've been telling ourselves an incomplete story about human history. The survivors of these submerged cities didn't just lose their homes to rising waters, they lost entire knowledge systems, technological capabilities, and cultural achievements that had taken millennia to develop. But they also preserved fragments, pieces of understanding that would serve as seeds for future civilizations. The monuments they built on higher ground, the knowledge they encoded in myths and mathematics, the techniques they passed down through carefully maintained traditions all represent attempts to bridge the gap between the lost world beneath the waves and the rebuilding world on dry land. We are the inheritors of their desperate preservation efforts. Every ancient text that describes advanced capabilities, every monument that demonstrates sophisticated engineering, every flood myth that preserves the memory of catastrophic destruction represents a gift from those who survived the unthinkable. They ensured that humanity wouldn't have to start completely from scratch after the waters receded. But inheritance comes with a responsibility. If we truly are rebuilding from the fragments of a submerged world, then our greatest discoveries may not lie ahead of us in uncharted territories of technological advancement. They may lie beneath us in the depths of oceans that hold more secrets than we've dared to imagine. The next great breakthrough in human understanding may require not just pushing forward into the unknown, but diving backward into the depths of what we've forgotten. The submerged cities off our coasts aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're libraries written in stone and sediment, repositories of knowledge and achievement that challenge our most basic assumptions about human development. They remind us that civilizations can rise to remarkable heights only to be swept away by forces beyond their control. But they also demonstrate that human ingenuity, determination, and wisdom can survive even the most catastrophic destruction, preserving the seeds of renewal for future generations brave enough to dive deep enough to recover them. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but not forever. As our technology advances and our understanding deepens, more of these underwater treasures will surface, bringing with them evidence of achievements that will force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the human story. The flood may have erased much, but it preserved enough for us to begin piecing together the remarkable truth about what lies beneath the waves, waiting to revolutionize our understanding of where we came from and where we might be heading. The pattern of evidence we've uncovered points to something that should fundamentally alter how we view human history. We're not looking at isolated incidents or random anomalies. We're seeing the remnants of a global catastrophe that reset human civilization, forcing our species to rebuild from fragments, while the greatest achievements of their predecessors lay buried beneath rising seas. The flood myths aren't just stories. They're the historical record of humanity's greatest survival story, and the underwater ruins are the physical proof that this survival came at an almost unimaginable cost. The remnants of advanced knowledge, scattered across ancient texts and mysterious artifacts, paint a picture that challenges everything we've been taught about the development of human understanding. When we examine the mathematical precision of early civilizations, we're not witnessing the stumbling first attempts of primitive minds discovering numbers for the first time. We're seeing the careful reconstruction of sophisticated systems that appear almost fully formed, as if they were being remembered rather than invented from scratch. Consider the mathematical tablets that emerged from early Mesopotamian civilizations. These aren't the crude calculations you'd expect from people supposedly just learning to count beyond their fingers. We're looking at complex astronomical observations that track planetary movements with precision that rivals modern instruments. These ancient astronomers were calculating the orbits of celestial bodies that are invisible to the naked eye, bodies that weren't officially rediscovered until we developed telescopes thousands of years later. The precision is staggering. They understood mathematical concepts that we didn't rediscover in the Western world until the Renaissance. Square roots, cubic equations, trigonometric relationships, all systematically applied with an accuracy that suggests not experimental fumbling, but inherited expertise. This wasn't trial and error learning. This was knowledge being carefully preserved and transmitted by people who understood its importance, even if they couldn't fully recreate the civilization that originally developed it. But the evidence extends far beyond mathematical tablets. In the temples of ancient Egypt, carved into stone walls with meticulous detail, we find images that have puzzled researchers for generations. These aren't crude stick figures or simple religious symbols. We're looking at technical diagrams that bear an unsettling resemblance to modern electrical devices. Bulb-like shapes connected to what appear to be cables, held by figures who seem to understand exactly what they're manipulating. The conventional explanation dismisses these as mythological representations, abstract religious concepts that have no basis in physical reality. But the technical precision of these carvings, the attention to detail in depicting what look like insulated bases and cable connections, suggests the artists were working from direct observation rather than imagination. These could be memories preserved in stone, attempts by survivors to record technologies they had witnessed, but could no longer fully understand or reproduce. The sophistication appears in unexpected places throughout the ancient world. In the highlands of Bolivia, carved into a single, massive block of stone, the Gate of the Sun presents astronomical calculations that rival modern calendars in their accuracy. The precision required to create such a system, the centuries of systematic observation needed to verify its accuracy, implies institutional knowledge maintained across generations. Yet this monument sits in a region showing clear evidence of catastrophic flooding, its foundations buried under layers of sediment that speak of sudden destruction. Perhaps most remarkable is a bronze mechanism recovered from an ancient Greek shipwreck, a device so sophisticated it seems to have fallen through time from a more advanced age. This mechanical computer, filled with precisely calibrated gears, could predict planetary movements, eclipses, and astronomical events with accuracy that wouldn't be matched again for over 1,000 years. The complexity of its construction, the mathematical principles underlying its operation, all point to a technological tradition far more advanced than anything we credit to ancient civilizations. But here's what makes this truly significant. This wasn't a unique creation, some isolated genius working in complete isolation. Ancient texts reference similar devices, and the mathematical knowledge required for its construction traces back through multiple civilizations to sources that themselves appear to emerge fully formed from even earlier traditions. We're not looking at the invention of new technology. We're witnessing the preservation and transmission of knowledge from a much older source. The pattern extends across cultures and continents with remarkable consistency. The Maya achieved astronomical calculations that match modern observations in their precision, yet their own traditions claim this knowledge came from ancestors who survived a great flood. Hindu texts describe technologies so advanced they read like science fiction. Yet these descriptions are embedded in religious traditions that predate known historical civilizations by thousands of years. The Vedic texts of ancient India contain mathematical concepts that weren't independently rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. They describe atomic theory, genetic principles, and cosmological models that align remarkably well with modern scientific understanding. The precision of their astronomical observations, recorded in texts thousands of years old, demonstrates a level of systematic study that could only come from institutional knowledge maintained across many generations. What ties all this together are the consistent references across cultures to teachers who arrived after great catastrophes to share this wisdom. The flood myths we've explored don't just describe destruction and survival, they emphasize the deliberate preservation of knowledge, skills, and understanding. The chosen survivors aren't just righteous individuals, they're specifically described as keepers of civilization's most important secrets, people tasked with ensuring that humanity's accumulated wisdom doesn't disappear entirely beneath the rising waters. These teachers, whether we call them the Anunnaki of Mesopotamian tradition, the Neteru of Egyptian texts, or the various wisdom bringers described in cultures around the world, share characteristics that suggest they may have been real individuals rather than mythological figures. They possessed knowledge that seemed magical to rebuilding societies, but this knowledge consisted of practical applications of scientific principles that had been developed over millennia and preserved through catastrophe by those fortunate enough to escape the destruction. The implications of this preserved knowledge model extend far beyond historical curiosity. If post-flood civilizations were indeed rebuilding rather than starting fresh, it explains anomalies that have puzzled researchers for generations. Why do the oldest layers of many ancient sites show the most sophisticated construction techniques? Why does advanced astronomical knowledge appear without apparent developmental stages? Why do mathematical systems emerge fully formed rather than showing gradual evolution? The answer suggests that human technological development isn't the linear progression we've assumed. Instead, it appears to be a cyclical process of advancement, catastrophic interruption, and careful reconstruction from whatever knowledge fragments the survivors managed to preserve through the chaos. Each cycle begins not from primitive Stone Age conditions, but from whatever knowledge base those who escaped the catastrophe could maintain and transmit. This perspective completely transforms our understanding of ancient achievements. The mathematical sophistication of early civilizations, their astronomical precision, their engineering capabilities may not represent humanity's first tentative steps toward understanding the cosmos. They may represent desperate efforts by survivors to remember and reconstruct capabilities that were once as natural and commonplace as our modern technologies are to us. The consistency of this pattern across isolated cultures and continents suggests something profound about the nature of advanced knowledge itself. Sophisticated understanding doesn't develop in a vacuum. It requires institutional continuity, systematic observation, and accumulated learning that spans many generations. When catastrophic events interrupt this process, the surviving fragments become the seeds from which new civilizations grow, carrying within them the genetic memory of far greater achievements. But if such knowledge once existed at levels that far exceeded what we credit to ancient peoples, what else might they have understood that we're only now beginning to rediscover? The flood myths hint at capabilities that sound fantastical to modern ears. Energy systems that could harness natural forces in ways we don't understand. Transportation methods that seem to defy conventional physics. Communication networks that could span continents without the infrastructure we consider necessary. The detailed descriptions in Hindu texts of flying machines, complete with technical specifications for their construction and operation, read like engineering manuals for advanced aircraft. The Mayan accounts of crystal-powered technologies, the Egyptian references to devices that could channel and manipulate celestial energies, the Mesopotamian descriptions of machines that could influence weather patterns. These may not be imaginative fiction, but fragmentary technical manuals. Their scientific principles lost, but their basic concepts preserved in mythological form. Modern science is beginning to rediscover principles that ancient wisdom traditions have long described in metaphorical language. Quantum mechanics, consciousness research, energy manipulation technologies, and genetic engineering are revealing possibilities that ancient texts have claimed as fundamental truths for thousands of years. The convergence suggests not that ancient peoples were remarkably prescient fortune tellers, but that they may have possessed scientific understanding that was nearly lost to catastrophic flooding, but preserved in whatever form possible. The question this raises is both profound and unsettling. If we are indeed rebuilding rather than building, if our greatest technological achievements represent recovery rather than discovery, what does this mean for our future development? Are we approaching the same levels of advancement that were achieved before the Great Flood swept them away? And if so, are we prepared for the cyclical challenges that such advancement might inevitably bring? The ancient texts that preserve flood memories also contain warnings about the dangers of unchecked technological development. They speak of civilizations that grew so advanced they forgot their connection to natural cycles, societies that became so powerful they believed themselves immune to cosmic forces and planetary changes. The floods in many of these traditions come not as random natural disasters, but as systemic corrections to imbalances created by excessive technological manipulation of natural systems. This cyclical view of civilization suggests that we may be approaching a critical juncture in our own technological development. The capabilities we're developing, artificial intelligence that could surpass human cognition, genetic manipulation that could reshape life itself, climate modification technologies that could alter planetary systems, space colonization efforts that could spread human influence beyond Earth, may be reaching levels comparable to those achieved by pre-flood civilizations. The question becomes whether we can learn from their apparent fate, whether the warnings preserved in flood myths and ancient wisdom traditions can guide us towards sustainable advancement rather than the cyclical destruction that seems to have claimed previous civilizations. The knowledge fragments they preserved weren't just technical specifications. They were also warnings, attempts to ensure that future civilizations would understand the dangers as well as the possibilities inherent in advanced technological development. The ocean floors hold additional pieces of this puzzle, but accessing them requires acknowledging possibilities that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human history and development. Each underwater discovery, each anomalous artifact recovered from the depths, each flood myth decoded and properly understood adds weight to the possibility that we've been living inside a much larger story than we imagined. We may not be the first human civilization to split atoms, to decode genetic information, to send signals across vast distances, or to manipulate matter at the molecular level. We may be the latest in a series of civilizations that have scaled these technological heights before, only to see their achievements washed away by forces that operate on timescales and with power levels that dwarf human planning and preparation. The evidence is accumulating like sediment on the ocean floor, building layers of proof that become increasingly difficult to explain away through conventional historical models. The flood myths, the preserved knowledge, the underwater ruins, the impossible precision of ancient monuments, all of it points toward a truth that would fundamentally alter our understanding of human civilization and our place in the larger cycles of planetary development. The survivors of the Great Flood weren't just preserving their own genetic lineage when they loaded their vessels with knowledge and seeds. They were preserving the future possibility of human advancement, ensuring that the next civilization wouldn't have to rediscover everything from the beginning. We are the inheritors of their desperate foresight, the beneficiaries of their determination to maintain some continuity of understanding across the vast gulf of catastrophic destruction. But inheritance comes with profound responsibility. If we truly are rebuilding from fragments of a lost world, then our greatest discoveries may not lie ahead of us in uncharted territories of scientific advancement. They may lie behind us in the depths of what we've forgotten, waiting to be recovered by those brave enough to dive deep enough into the evidence, and honest enough to acknowledge what it reveals about the true nature of human civilization. The ancient world wasn't primitive. It was recovering. The knowledge wasn't being invented. It was being remembered. The achievements weren't humanity's first attempts at understanding the universe. They were desperate efforts to rebuild capabilities that had once been commonplace, but were nearly lost to waters that rose faster than any civilization could adapt to their fury. And if the cyclical patterns preserved in ancient wisdom are accurate, if history truly does repeat in great spirals of advancement and destruction, then understanding what happened before becomes not just a matter of historical curiosity, but a matter of survival for our own technological civilization. The flood myths aren't just stories about the past. They may be instruction manuals for the future, preserved by those who survived the unthinkable, to help ensure that the next time around, humanity might be better prepared for the challenges that come with reaching toward the stars while standing on a planet that operates according to cycles far larger than human lifespans can comprehend. The knowledge is there, scattered in fragments across ancient texts and underwater ruins, waiting for a civilization mature enough to piece it together and wise enough to learn from what it reveals. The question is whether we're ready to acknowledge that our greatest teachers may not be those who point us toward an unprecedented future, but those who can help us remember a past so advanced it was nearly lost to time and tide. The threads we've been following lead to an uncomfortable realization that stretches far beyond academic curiosity. If the evidence points towards cyclical rises and falls of human civilization, if the flood myths preserve memories of repeated catastrophes that reset our species' progress, then we're not just uncovering ancient history, we're staring into a mirror that reflects our own potential future. The Hindu concept of Yuga cycles offers a framework that makes the scattered evidence coalesce into a terrifying pattern. These ancient texts describe vast epochs of time where civilizations rise to incredible heights of knowledge and power, only to fall when they lose connection with natural balance. The Satya Yuga represents a golden age of harmony and advanced understanding. The Kali Yuga marks the end times when knowledge is lost, chaos reigns, and destruction clears the slate for a new cycle to begin. But here's what makes this cyclical view so unsettling when applied to our current situation. The Vedic texts don't describe these cycles as random events or divine punishments. They present them as natural consequences of civilizations that grow so advanced they begin to believe themselves separate from and superior to the cosmic forces that govern planetary systems. Sound familiar? The Mayan long count calendar operates on similar principles, tracking vast cycles of creation and destruction that span thousands of years. Each Baktun, lasting roughly 400 years, builds toward transformation points where old worlds end and new ones begin. The Maya didn't see these transitions as endings, but as necessary resets that prevented civilizations from growing so imbalanced they would destroy not just themselves, but the natural systems that support all life. These aren't primitive superstitions dreamed up by cultures that didn't understand natural processes. These are sophisticated models of planetary development created by peoples who had access to observational data spanning millennia. The precision of Mayan astronomical calculations, the mathematical sophistication of Hindu cosmological models, the detailed understanding of celestial cycles preserved in these traditions all suggest they were working from databases of information accumulated over vast periods of systematic study. The pattern extends beyond these well-known examples. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok not as a final ending, but as a cleansing that allows new worlds to emerge from the ashes of the old. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of dreamtime cycles, where the land is repeatedly reshaped by forces beyond human control, with each transformation requiring survivors to adapt their understanding to new conditions. Egyptian texts reference multiple destructions and rebirths, with each cycle preserving fragments of wisdom while losing other capabilities entirely. What makes this cyclical perspective particularly relevant to our current situation is the mechanism these traditions describe for how civilizations fall. It's not invasion by external enemies or random natural disasters. It's the accumulation of imbalances created by technologies and social systems that grow beyond the wisdom needed to manage them sustainably. Civilizations collapse when their capabilities exceed their understanding of consequences. Consider our current technological trajectory in light of these ancient warnings. We're developing artificial intelligence systems whose decision-making processes we don't fully understand. We're manipulating genetic codes with techniques that could reshape the fundamental nature of life itself. We're altering atmospheric chemistry on a planetary scale while debating whether the changes we're causing might trigger feedback loops beyond our control. We're building weapons that could sterilize continents, creating economic systems that treat finite planetary resources as infinite commodities, and developing space technologies that could either expand human influence throughout the solar system or create debris fields that trap us permanently on Earth. Every one of these capabilities represents power that previous generations would have considered godlike, yet we're deploying them with planning horizons measured in decades rather than centuries. The ancient texts that preserve cyclical wisdom consistently warn about this pattern. Civilizations that achieve great power without corresponding wisdom inevitably create conditions that trigger their own destruction. The floods, in many traditions, aren't sent by angry gods as punishment. They're natural consequences of imbalances that accumulate when technological capabilities outpace understanding of their long-term effects. The Younger Dryas period provides a scientific framework for understanding how such resets actually occur. The evidence suggests that comet impacts triggered not just immediate destruction, but cascading changes that reshaped global climate systems within decades. Ice sheets that had been stable for thousands of years melted catastrophically. Ocean currents that had maintained consistent patterns for millennia shifted dramatically. Atmospheric chemistry changed so rapidly that ecosystems worldwide struggled to adapt. But here's the crucial point that connects ancient wisdom to modern science. These changes weren't just random cosmic accidents. They occurred during a period when the planet was already stressed by the ending of an ice age, when natural systems were in transition and therefore more vulnerable to additional disruptions. The comet impacts may have been the trigger, but the catastrophic scale of the changes they caused was amplified by existing instabilities in planetary systems. We're currently living through another period of planetary transition. Climate systems are shifting, ocean chemistry is changing, magnetic field patterns are fluctuating, and solar activity is following cycles that interact with all these terrestrial changes in ways we're only beginning to understand. If the cyclical model is accurate, periods of natural transition are precisely when civilizations are most vulnerable to the consequences of their own technological overreach. The flood myths consistently describe the destruction as coming suddenly, catching advanced civilizations off guard despite their sophisticated knowledge and powerful technologies. The survivors who preserve fragments of wisdom for future generations are typically those who maintained awareness of larger cycles and natural patterns rather than those who are most technologically advanced. The keepers of traditional knowledge, the observers of natural signs, the maintainers of sustainable practices, these are the ones who recognize danger and prepare accordingly. This pattern suggests something profoundly important about the relationship between technological advancement and civilizational survival. Raw capability isn't enough. Wisdom traditions that maintain awareness of cyclical patterns, that understand the importance of balance between human systems and natural forces, that preserve knowledge of how to live sustainably within planetary limits. These may be more crucial for long-term survival than the most advanced technologies. The The evidence we've been examining throughout this investigation points towards civilizations that achieved remarkable technological capabilities but lost touch with the cyclical wisdom that could have helped them navigate planetary transitions successfully. The precision engineering of underwater ruins, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient texts, the advanced mathematical understanding encoded in monuments, all of this suggests capabilities that rival or exceed our own in many areas. Yet these civilizations were swept away by forces they either didn't anticipate or couldn't adapt to quickly enough. Their technologies, however advanced, couldn't protect them from the consequences of living on a dynamic planet that operates according to cycles much larger than human planning typically encompasses. Their knowledge, however sophisticated, couldn't save them from changes that required not just technical solutions but fundamental shifts in how they related to natural systems. The fragments of their achievements that survived did so not because they were the most technologically impressive, but because they were encoded in forms that could withstand catastrophic change. Stone monuments that align with celestial cycles. Mathematical principles that remain valid regardless of social upheaval. Myths and stories that preserve essential information in forms that can be transmitted orally when written records are destroyed. Practical knowledge about sustainable living that remains useful regardless of technological context. This preservation pattern offers crucial insights for our own situation. As we develop increasingly powerful technologies, the most important question isn't just what we can accomplish with them, but what we're doing to ensure that essential knowledge and capabilities can survive if our current systems prove unsustainable. Are we maintaining the wisdom traditions that could guide us through planetary transitions? Are we preserving the practical skills that could sustain human communities if complex technologies become unavailable? Are we teaching future generations to recognize and respond to natural cycles that operate on timescales longer than individual lifetimes? The cyclical view of history suggests that these questions aren't just philosophical curiosities. They're practical preparations for challenges that may be inevitable rather than merely possible. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, if the patterns preserved in ancient wisdom reflect actual experience rather than imaginative speculation, then understanding how to navigate cyclical challenges becomes essential knowledge for any civilization that hopes to achieve long-term sustainability. The ocean depths continue to yield evidence that supports this cyclical interpretation of human history. Each new underwater discovery, each anomalous artifact that predates conventional timelines, each flood myth that proves to contain accurate information about past events, adds weight to the possibility that we're living within cycles much larger than our current historical models acknowledge. But the most important discoveries may not be the ones that prove how advanced previous civilizations became. They may be the ones that reveal how they failed to maintain balance with natural systems, how their technologies created vulnerabilities they couldn't compensate for, how their loss of cyclical awareness made them vulnerable to changes they might otherwise have navigated successfully. The survivors of previous cycles didn't just preserve fragments of technical knowledge, they preserved warnings, insights about the dangers inherent in unchecked technological development, wisdom about the importance of maintaining harmony with natural forces that operate on planetary scales. These warnings, encoded in myths and traditions that have survived for thousands of years, may be the most valuable inheritance they left for future civilizations. We stand at a crossroads that may determine whether our current technological civilization joins the ranks of those whose achievements lie buried beneath rising seas, or becomes the first to successfully navigate the cyclical challenges that have reset human progress repeatedly throughout history. The choice isn't just about developing better technologies. It's about developing the wisdom to use those technologies in ways that work with natural cycles rather than against them. The flood myths aren't just stories about what happened before. They're instruction manuals for what might happen again, preserved by survivors who understood that the greatest gift they could give to future generations wasn't just the knowledge to rebuild, but the wisdom to build differently. The question facing us now is whether we're prepared to learn from their experience, or whether we're destined to repeat their mistakes on an even grander scale. The evidence suggests that the next great discovery in human civilization may not come from pushing further into uncharted territories of technological advancement. It may come from diving deeper into the wisdom preserved by those who survived previous cycles, learning not just what they achieved, but how they failed, and using that understanding to chart a course that leads not to cyclical destruction, but to sustainable prosperity that can endure across the vast timescales on which planetary systems operate. The waters that destroyed previous civilizations didn't just take away their cities and technologies. They preserved their stories, their warnings, their hard-won understanding of what it truly takes for human civilization to thrive within the larger cycles that govern life on Earth. Those stories are calling to us from the depths, asking whether we're wise enough to listen and humble enough to learn from those who paid the ultimate price for knowledge. We now have the opportunity to apply, while there's still time to choose a different path. But even as we grapple with these cyclical patterns and their implications for our own future, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility. What if the resistance to acknowledging this evidence, the systematic dismissal of anomalous discoveries, the underfunding of research that could revolutionize our understanding of human history? What if these aren't just institutional inertia or academic conservatism? What if there's a deliberate effort to keep these truths buried as deep as the cities beneath our oceans? The pattern of suppression is too consistent, too systematic to be merely accidental. Sites like the Cuban underwater structures, discovered with great fanfare, and then quickly classified and restricted from further exploration. Artifacts like the Baghdad battery, explained away as ritual objects despite clear evidence of electrical generation capability. Monuments like Yonaguni, dismissed as natural formations despite obvious tool marks, and geometric precision that defies geological explanation. Each time evidence emerges that challenges the linear narrative of human progress, it faces a coordinated response designed not to investigate, but to neutralize. Funding disappears. Access is restricted. Alternative explanations, however implausible, are promoted over straightforward interpretations of the evidence. Researchers who persist in studying these anomalies find their careers marginalized, their work excluded from mainstream journals, their discoveries relegated to the fringes of acceptable discourse. This isn't the behavior of institutions committed to understanding truth wherever it leads. This is the behavior of systems designed to protect specific narratives regardless of contradictory evidence. The question is why? What's so dangerous about acknowledging that advanced civilizations existed before the currently accepted timeline? What's so threatening about admitting that human technological development might be cyclical rather than linear? The answer may lie not in what these discoveries reveal about the past, but in what they imply about our present and future. If we're not the first human civilization to achieve advanced capabilities, if we're actually rebuilding from fragments of something far greater that was destroyed by forces beyond its control, then our entire understanding of human progress, our confidence in technological solutions, our faith in continuous advancement, all of it becomes questionable. More disturbing still, if the cyclical model is accurate, if civilizations have repeatedly risen to great heights, only to be swept away by consequences they couldn't foresee or control, then our current trajectory toward ever greater technological power might not be leading toward unprecedented success, but toward familiar destruction. The institutions that benefit from the current system, that derive power and profit from continuous technological acceleration, have every reason to suppress evidence that suggests such acceleration might be inherently unsustainable. Consider who benefits from maintaining the linear narrative of human progress. Military-industrial complexes that justify ever-increasing defense spending by promising technological superiority. corporations that extract maximum profit by treating planetary resources as infinite commodities, political systems that maintain legitimacy by promising continuous economic growth, academic institutions that build reputations on established paradigms. All of these power structures depend on the assumption that we're climbing toward unprecedented heights, rather than repeating cycles that have ended in collapse before. If the public understood that previous civilizations achieved remarkable capabilities only to see them swept away by consequences they couldn't control, it might raise uncomfortable questions about our own trajectory. If people realized that the greatest achievements of the past were accomplished by civilizations that maintained harmony with natural cycles rather than trying to dominate them, it might challenge the assumptions underlying our current economic and political systems. The conspiracy of silence isn't necessarily coordinated by a single, shadowy organization. It's maintained by interconnected institutions that share common interests in preserving narratives that support their continued power and influence. Academic funding flows toward research that confirms rather than challenges established models. Media attention focuses on discoveries that fit comfortable categories rather than anomalies that require fundamental rethinking. Government resources support projects that enhance national prestige rather than investigations that might reveal inconvenient truths about the nature of civilizational development. But the evidence continues to accumulate despite these institutional barriers. Modern technology makes it increasingly difficult to suppress discoveries entirely. Satellite imagery reveals anomalous structures that can't be explained away. Deep-sea exploration uncovers ruins that don't fit accepted timelines. Independent researchers share findings through networks that bypass traditional gatekeepers. The dam of conventional thinking shows more cracks with each passing year. What makes this particularly significant is that we may be approaching a critical juncture where the truth can no longer be contained. The same technologies that enable unprecedented surveillance and control also enable unprecedented access to information and communication. The same global connectivity that allows coordinated suppression of inconvenient discoveries also allows rapid dissemination of evidence that challenges official narratives. The ocean floors, with their preserved cities and buried secrets, represent more than just archaeological treasures waiting to be discovered. They represent a test of whether our civilization has the wisdom to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about the cyclical nature of human development, or whether we'll continue to suppress evidence that challenges our assumptions until the same forces that destroyed previous civilizations catch us equally unprepared. The choice we face isn't just about funding deep-sea exploration or accepting alternative historical timelines. It's about whether we have the intellectual courage to confront the possibility that our greatest achievements might be shadows of something far greater that was lost to forces we don't yet understand. It's about whether we're willing to learn from the failures of previous cycles or whether we'll repeat them with the same tragic confidence that seems to have characterized every civilization that came before us. The survivors of the Great Flood didn't just preserve knowledge and stories as gifts for future generations. They preserved warnings encoded in myths and monuments about the dangers of losing touch with the natural cycles that govern planetary development. These warnings are calling to us from the depths, asking whether we're wise enough to listen and humble enough to change course before it's too late. But first, we have to be brave enough to acknowledge that the evidence exists, that the pattern is real, and that the institutions we trust to guide our understanding of reality might have reasons for keeping us ignorant of truths that could transform our approach to technological development and civilizational sustainability. The conspiracy of silence can only be maintained as long as we're willing to accept comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The moment we demand honest investigation of the evidence lying beneath our oceans, the entire narrative of human exceptionalism and linear progress begins to crumble. And perhaps that crumbling is exactly what we need. Perhaps the greatest gift the survivors of previous cycles left us isn't just fragments of their knowledge, but the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. Perhaps the cities beneath the waves aren't just graveyards of failed civilizations, but schools where we can study what happens when technological capability outpaces wisdom, when civilizations lose touch with the natural forces that sustain all life on Earth. The question is whether we're students willing to learn from these underwater classrooms, or whether we're destined to become the next lesson for civilizations that will rise from our own ruins, wondering how we could have achieved so much yet understood so little about the forces that determine whether human societies survive or join the ranks of the lost worlds, lying silent in the depths of time. The depths of our oceans aren't just hiding shipwrecks and marine life. They're concealing entire chapters of human achievement that could revolutionize everything we think we know about our past. As we stand on the threshold of unprecedented deep-sea exploration capabilities, we're about to confront evidence that will either validate the cyclical view of civilization or force us to completely reimagine the story we've been telling ourselves about human development. The technology exists right now to map every square mile of the ocean floor with precision that would have seemed magical just decades ago. Autonomous underwater vehicles can dive to crushing depths and transmit high-definition imagery in real time. Side-scan sonar can penetrate sediment layers to reveal structures buried for millennia. Advanced dating techniques can provide accurate timelines for organic materials preserved in the anaerobic environments of deep ocean basins. Yet less than 25% of our ocean floors have been thoroughly explored. That means 75% of our planet's surface remains as mysterious as an alien world, potentially harboring evidence that could transform our understanding of human history overnight. The question isn't whether more submerged cities exist. The question is how many we'll find and whether we're prepared for what they might reveal about the true scope of pre-flood civilizations. Consider what we've already discovered with primitive exploration methods compared to what we have available now. The Gulf of Cambay was mapped with sonar technology from the early 2000s. Yonaguni was explored by sport divers using basic underwater cameras. The Cuban structures were detected with equipment that's now considered obsolete. If these limited investigations could uncover evidence of sophisticated urban planning and advanced engineering, what might we find with modern deep-sea exploration platforms operating at full capacity? The implications extend far beyond individual archaeological sites. If the scattered underwater ruins we've already identified represent nodes in a global network of coastal civilizations, then comprehensive ocean floor mapping could reveal the true extent of pre-flood human achievement. We might discover trade routes that connected continents, port cities that facilitated cultural exchange on a scale not seen again for thousands of years, and technological centers that developed capabilities we're only now beginning to understand. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The same institutional forces that have suppressed investigation of known anomalies are actively working to limit the scope and funding of deep-sea exploration. Projects that could revolutionize our understanding of human history receive a fraction of the resources devoted to conventional archaeological digs that confirm rather than challenge accepted narratives. Access to promising sites is restricted through bureaucratic barriers that have nothing to do with scientific merit and everything to do with protecting established paradigms. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. Every time underwater exploration begins to yield evidence that challenges conventional timelines, funding mysteriously disappears or access becomes restricted for vague national security reasons. The Cuban structures, despite their obvious geometric precision and potential historical significance, remain largely off-limits to serious investigation. The Bimini Road continues to generate controversy not because the evidence is ambiguous, but because its implications threaten academic careers built on maintaining the linear narrative of human progress. This institutional resistance becomes even more suspicious when you consider the broader context of what's at stake. If comprehensive ocean floor exploration revealed evidence of a global pre-flood civilization with technological capabilities rivaling our own, it would fundamentally undermine the assumptions underlying our current economic, political, and social systems. The entire mythology of continuous progress, of humanity's unique position as the first species to achieve advanced civilization, would collapse overnight. Military establishments that justify enormous budgets by promising technological superiority would have to acknowledge that such superiority has been achieved before and lost to forces beyond human control. Corporations that extract maximum profit by treating planetary resources as infinite commodities would face uncomfortable questions about the sustainability of exponential growth models. Political systems that maintain legitimacy through promises of ever-increasing prosperity would have to confront the possibility that such promises have been made and broken by previous civilizations that left nothing but ruins beneath the waves. The conspiracy of silence isn't maintained by a single coordinated organization, but by interconnected institutions that share common interests in preserving narratives that support their continued power and influence. Academic funding flows toward research that confirms established models. Media attention focuses on discoveries that fit comfortable categories. Government resources support projects that enhance national prestige rather than investigations that might reveal inconvenient truths about the cyclical nature of civilizational development. Yet the evidence continues to accumulate like sediment on the ocean floor, building layers of proof that become increasingly difficult to explain away through conventional historical models. Independent researchers using crowd-funded expeditions are beginning to bypass traditional gatekeepers. Private exploration companies are developing technologies that make deep-sea investigation more accessible than ever before. Satellite imagery is revealing anomalous formations that demand investigation regardless of institutional preferences. The dam of conventional thinking shows more cracks with each passing year, and the pressure building behind it represents more than just academic curiosity. It represents a fundamental challenge to how we understand our place in the larger cycles of planetary development. If civilizations have risen to great heights before only to be swept away by consequences they couldn't foresee or control, then our current trajectory toward ever greater technological power might not be leading toward unprecedented success, but toward familiar destruction. The ocean floors hold the answers to questions that could determine whether our current technological civilization survives the challenges ahead or joins the ranks of those whose achievements lie buried beneath rising seas. But accessing those answers requires acknowledging possibilities that challenge our most basic assumptions about human uniqueness and continuous progress. What we discover in the depths over the coming decades won't just rewrite history textbooks. It will force us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of technological development, the relationship between human civilization and natural cycles, and whether we have the wisdom to learn from the failures of those who came before us. The cities beneath the waves aren't just archaeological treasures waiting to be catalogued. They're classrooms where we can study what happens when civilizations lose touch with the forces that sustain all life on Earth. The survivors of previous cycles didn't just preserve fragments of technical knowledge in their flood myths and stone monuments. They preserved warnings about the dangers of unchecked technological advancement, about the importance of maintaining harmony with natural systems, about the cyclical nature of rise and fall that seems to govern civilizational development on planetary scales. These warnings are encoded in the very structures we're discovering beneath the waves, waiting for a civilization mature enough to recognize them and wise enough to heed their implications. But first, we have to be brave enough to look. We have to demand honest investigation of the evidence lying beneath our oceans, regardless of how uncomfortable the implications might be for our current understanding of human exceptionalism and linear progress. We have to fund deep-sea exploration, not just as a scientific curiosity, but as an essential component of understanding our own potential future. The choice we face isn't just about archaeological discovery or historical revision. It's about whether we have the intellectual courage to confront the possibility that our greatest achievements might be shadows of something far greater that was lost to forces we don't yet understand. It's about whether we're willing to learn from the cyclical patterns preserved in stone and sediment, or whether we'll repeat the same mistakes with the same tragic confidence that seems to have characterized every advanced civilization that came before us. The depths are calling, asking whether we're ready to dive deep enough to recover not just the artifacts of lost worlds, but the wisdom they preserved about what it truly takes for human civilization to thrive within the larger cycles that govern life on Earth. The question is whether we're students willing to learn from these underwater classrooms, or whether we're destined to become the next lesson for civilizations that will rise from our own ruins, wondering how we could have achieved so much, yet understood so little about the forces that determine whether human societies survive or join the ranks of the lost worlds, lying silent in the depths of time. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but not forever. As our technology advances and our courage grows, more of these underwater treasures will surface, bringing with them evidence that will either validate our assumptions about human progress or shatter them entirely. The flood may have erased much, but it preserved enough for us to begin piecing together a truth that could transform our understanding of where we came from, where we're going, and what we need to do differently if we want to avoid becoming another cautionary tale preserved in sediment and stone for future civilizations to discover and learn from. The survivors of the Great Flood left us more than just fragments of their knowledge. They left us the opportunity to break the cycle, to become the first human civilization that learned from the mistakes of those who came before, rather than repeating them on an even grander scale. The question is whether we're wise enough to take that opportunity and humble enough to acknowledge that our greatest teachers might not be those who point us toward an unprecedented future, but those who can help us remember a past so advanced it challenges everything. We think we know about the true potential and ultimate fragility of human civilization. The evidence is there, waiting in the depths. The choice of whether to seek it out and learn from it is ours. But time may be running shorter than we imagine, and the forces that destroyed previous civilizations may already be gathering strength for another turn of the wheel. The flood myths aren't just stories about what happened before, they're warnings about what could happen again, preserved by survivors who understood that the greatest gift they could give future generations wasn't just the tools to rebuild, but the wisdom to build differently. The depths are speaking. The question is whether we're listening, and whether we'll act on what they're trying to tell us before it's too late to change course. The next great discovery in human civilization may not come from pushing further into space, or deeper into the quantum realm. It may come from diving backward into the depths of our own forgotten history, recovering the knowledge that was nearly lost beneath the rising waters of time, and using that understanding to chart a course towards sustainable prosperity that can endure across the vast timescales on which planetary systems operate, and civilizations either thrive or fall. The waters have receded, but their secrets remain buried in the deepest trenches of our collective memory. As we stand at the edge of this vast mystery, we're confronted with a truth that stretches far beyond the comfortable boundaries of what we've been taught to believe about human history. What we've uncovered isn't just evidence of a single catastrophic flood or the remains of one lost civilization. We've traced the outline of something far more profound, a pattern of rise and fall that suggests human achievement operates on cycles so vast they dwarf our normal understanding of historical time. The flood myths aren't just stories about divine judgment or moral lessons. They're survival manuals preserved by those who witnessed the unthinkable and wanted future generations to understand both what was possible and what was at stake. The physical evidence speaks with a voice that can't be silenced by institutional skepticism or academic conservatism. The scarred landscapes that bear witness to catastrophic flooding, the precision-engineered monuments that predate accepted timelines by thousands of years, the submerged cities that reveal urban planning sophistication we're only now beginning to appreciate. All of it points toward the same unsettling conclusion. We are not the first, we may not even be the second or third. Human civilization, with all its technological marvels and accumulated wisdom, appears to be part of a much longer story than we've allowed ourselves to imagine. The knowledge that appears suddenly in ancient texts, the astronomical precision embedded in monuments built by supposedly primitive peoples, the engineering techniques that challenge our assumptions about what's possible with ancient tools. These aren't anomalies to be explained away. They're inheritance, fragments of understanding passed down by survivors who watched their world disappear beneath rising waters. But here's what makes this revelation both terrifying and hopeful. If civilizations have achieved great heights before, if they've developed technologies and understanding that we're only now rediscovering, then we're not alone in facing the challenges that come with advanced capabilities. The warnings encoded in flood myths, the cyclical view of history preserved in ancient calendars, the emphasis on maintaining balance with natural forces, these represent hard-won wisdom about what it takes for human societies to survive the consequences of their own success. The survivors of previous cycles didn't just preserve technical knowledge, they preserved understanding about the relationship between human ambition and planetary systems, about the importance of remembering that we live within cycles much larger than individual lifetimes or even entire civilizations. They encoded warnings about what happens when societies become so confident in their technological capabilities that they forget their dependence on forces beyond their control. The ocean floors hold more than archaeological treasures. They hold classrooms where we can study the consequences of losing touch with cyclical wisdom, of believing that continuous growth and technological acceleration can continue indefinitely without triggering systemic corrections. The submerged cities aren't just evidence of past achievements, they're monuments to the fragility of human civilization when it grows beyond the wisdom needed to sustain it. As we develop artificial intelligence that could surpass human cognition, as we manipulate genetic codes that could reshape life itself, as we alter atmospheric chemistry on a planetary scale, we're approaching the same crossroads that previous civilizations may have faced. The question isn't whether we can develop these capabilities. The question is whether we have the wisdom to use them in ways that work with natural cycles rather than against them. The conspiracy of silence that has kept these discoveries on the margins of acceptable discourse isn't just academic politics. It represents a deeper resistance to acknowledging truths that would challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying our current trajectory. If we're rebuilding rather than building, if our greatest achievements represent recovery rather than unprecedented discovery, then the entire mythology of continuous progress collapses. But that collapse might be exactly what we need. The linear narrative of human advancement, the belief that we're climbing toward unprecedented heights, the confidence that technological solutions can solve any problem. These comfortable assumptions may be preventing us from learning the most important lessons that previous civilizations paid enormous prices to teach us. The depths are calling to us with voices that have been silenced for thousands of years. They're asking whether we're wise enough to listen, humble enough to learn, and brave enough to change course before we become the next cautionary tale preserved in sediment and stone. The flood myths weren't just about what happened before. They were about what could happen again, and what we need to do differently if we want to break the cycle. The evidence is there, waiting beneath layers of water and time and institutional resistance. The choice of whether to seek it out, to fund the exploration that could revolutionize our understanding of human potential and limitation, to acknowledge the cyclical nature of civilizational development. That choice is ours to make, but time may be shorter than we imagine. The same forces that destroyed previous civilizations, cosmic impacts, climate instability, the consequences of unchecked technological development, operate on their own schedules, indifferent to human planning horizons. The survivors of the Great Flood left us more than just fragments of their knowledge. They left us the opportunity to become the first human civilization that learned from the mistakes of those who came before, rather than repeating them on an even grander scale. The question facing us now isn't whether the Great Flood was real or whether advanced civilizations existed before us. The evidence has moved beyond speculation to documentation. The question is whether we're mature enough as a species to acknowledge what that evidence reveals about the cyclical nature of human achievement, and wise enough to use that understanding to chart a different course. The depths have preserved more than just cities and artifacts. They've preserved the possibility of redemption, the chance to break free from cycles of rise and fall that have claimed every previous attempt at advanced civilization. But redemption requires recognition, and recognition requires the courage to dive deep enough into uncomfortable truths to recover the wisdom that was nearly lost beneath the rising waters of time. The flood didn't just erase civilizations, it preserved their warnings, their hard-won understanding of what it takes for human societies to thrive within the larger systems that govern life on Earth. Those warnings are calling to us from the depths, asking whether we're ready to listen and whether we'll act on what they're trying to tell us before it's too late to choose a different path. The next great discovery in human civilization may not require looking forward into uncharted territories of technological advancement. It may require looking backward into the depths of what we've forgotten, recovering the knowledge that was nearly lost beneath the waves, and using that understanding to ensure that our current chapter in the human story doesn't end the same way as all the others. The survivors of the Great Flood didn't just preserve life, they preserved hope, the hope that someday a human civilization would emerge that was wise enough to learn from the past rather than being condemned to repeat it. We have the opportunity to be that civilization. The question is whether we'll take it, or whether future explorers will one day discover our cities beneath the waves, wondering how we could have achieved so much yet understood so little about the forces that determine whether human societies survive or join the ranks of the lost worlds, lying silent in the depths of time. The flood was real, the civilizations were real, the warnings are real, the choice is ours. So what do you make of this? History isn't a straight line. It's a cycle, a wheel turning through creation and destruction. The flood myths don't just tell us what was lost, they urge us to listen, to seek, to question. What secrets lie beneath the waves, in the silt, in the stories? Are we ready to face a past that challenges our place in the universe? The evidence is there. The pattern is clear. For now, keep your mind open, share your thoughts, and join Sleep Mysteries as we chase the shadows of lost civilizations. The past has spoken. Let's listen to what it's trying to tell us. Sweet dreams, fellow guardians of human wisdom.